Hello and welcome to our first gathering place. I am so excited to start this new adventure. I am Sandra Wallace. For those of you who don't know me, I am a OCD, anxiety, and depression coach here in Canada. And I just want to give you a little bit of background on why we decided we were going to start the gathering place. One of the reasons was an opportunity for people to come and be able to listen to not only my story, but other people's stories of living with anxiety, OCD, and or depression. And I wanted it to be a safe place that we can come to and we can just reflect on different aspects of our life, what has been beneficial, what has not been so beneficial in helping us on this journey of living alongside whatever it is that we are living with. Now, I had spoke to my virtual assistant Daisy about starting this in the fall. I've had it on my mind for several months, but I thought fall might be a good time to actually start the gathering place, because fall is a time of transition for a lot of us, transitioning back maybe to school for those who are in the academic world. It can also be a time of a new opportunity to switch jobs. It's a change in seasons here in Canada. And there's lots of different things that factor in when we go into the season of fall, that my clients have also mentioned at this time of year that their anxiety can be quite elevated and their OCD symptoms can worsen, and depression can actually be part of their life going into the colder weather. And so that was some of the reasons I wanted to do this, but more importantly, I want to serve. That is my number one goal of having the gathering place. And we're going to meet on a regular monthly basis every last Wednesday of the month. So then it's easy to put in your calendar to track it and remember it a lot easier. And while I'm thinking of it, we also are going to start meeting. We started this month again in September with a Q&A. Question and answer period, a session that runs from 7 to 8 p.m. Central Standard Time on the first Monday of the month. So we have two programs going on a monthly regular basis. So Q&A, you come, you show up, you can bring your questions at that time. You could submit earlier. There's a form on our website that you can fill out and submit your questions in advance should you not be able to make it or you don't feel comfortable asking during the session. So that one's the Q&A every first Monday of the month. And then tonight's is every last Wednesday of the month, and that's called the Gathering Place. Now, in the Gathering Place, I'm going to try to bring in sometimes guest speakers. Sometimes I'll be sharing from my journal. Sometimes I will just talk on a theme. But tonight I wanted it just to be a general introductory into the Gathering Place sessions. And tonight I wanted to make sure that I talk about both anxiety and also a little bit on OCD and depression. But tonight's theme is going to be around anxiety, because most of us can identify with living with anxiety. And anxiety is something that is actually beneficial for us when we're in a dangerous situation. But people living with anxiety often misperceive the world around them, and their anxiety lingers on for sometimes on indefinitely. And so when it becomes an issue is when we can't get rid of the anxiety. Now, anxiety is a fight or flight response. So when we're in danger, or we are even an example of touching the stove and then removing your hand, the brain works that quickly to say, look, there's some form of danger here. You need to either flee and leave the situation or be able to resolve it. So when I think about that, the difference between people that can have an anxious moment and then let it go, and then between them and between us who can't let it go, is the fact that the fact is that we kind of get stuck. I sometimes use the analogy of quicksand. You feel like you're just kind of sinking down further and further, and the more you sink down, the more helpless you feel. That can be very similar when we're having anxious moments and we're not able to deal with it effectively. Another example I use is, say, for example, your fire detector goes off in your house when you're cooking. Maybe your pot's turned on too high or something spilling, and there's steam coming out of the appliances, and our fire detector goes off to warn us that there's danger. The same thing happens with myself and with other people that are living with anxiety. Often the fire detector goes off, but there is no real immediate danger, but our brain is telling us otherwise. And this can be really difficult because we tend to start thinking negatively, and it can spiral into all kinds of different themes and anxiety for a person. And it becomes sometimes more difficult to get out of it each time. I did have a few notes that I just want to make sure that I cover on. So I'm just going to reference my notes. It's really our perception of both the world around us and our own thoughts that often get us into trouble. We never will be able to quite eliminate anxiety, nor is that the goal here in having these support sessions where we can talk about our anxiety. The goal is never to eliminate the anxiety, but more about being able to manage the anxiety. And that's what I want to be able to do through the gathering place and question and answer sessions that we have on a regular basis. Now, how do we manage it? For some, it can be more difficult than others. So what I like to do when I'm meeting with someone for the first time and I'm coaching them is I'd like to get a really good snapshot of what's going on in their life as it relates to anxiety. And often we can find these common threads. Think of a thread if you're a sewer, or you think of a spool of thread. That thread can kind of be associated with many different themes of anxiety. There's common threads and common thoughts that we associate with certain situations or ideas. So it's important that we're able to recognize them, and then even more important to be able to follow through and do something about them. Now, uncertainty is not a word that we like to use in our vocabulary when we're living with anxiety. Quite the opposite. We want certainty. We want it, and we want it now. So, and we will go to extreme measures to try and get certainty over it, whatever it is that's causing us anxiety. But we also need to learn right from the beginning to let go of wanting certainty, because nobody in life gets 100% certainty on anything. We're not certain of what's going to happen after we get off this session, and we don't know what tomorrow brings. So it's really important to realize that you need to start learning to live with uncertainty. And that is probably one of the most difficult and the biggest obstacle that we have to work through on a regular basis until we get good at it. And we can get good at it. It's just knowing the right tools and the right ways to look at it. So when I'm working with people on this part here of the uncertainty, I always tell them that we can equip you, and we've got the ammunition to use to fight off this anxiety, but we are not able to do it unless the person is willing and able to do it. I can give the best approaches, the best tools, but if the person on the receiving end is not willing to take the risks and do it scared and lean into the discomfort, then it's not going to be productive. So that's a really important aspect when you're thinking about, do you want to get help for your anxiety? Will you be able to follow through with it? And the answer is yes to both. You do want to get help, and you want to just be able to follow through and know that you can and will get better. It takes time, just like anything in life, right? That's worth having. It takes time. So another thing I talk about is knowledge. Once you have that knowledge and recognize it for anxiety, it's what do we do with that knowledge? Knowledge is not necessarily power, it's potential power. It's what you do. Once you find out and identify that it's anxiety, then what's next? And what's next is making a list of everything that is associated with your anxiety. And then we start to utilize that list to be able to go out and face our fears. Now that takes time and effort, but it's also very rewarding when you can do it. Now, when you're living with anxiety, another thing that's good to do is journal. I always tell my clients to start journaling if they haven't already started, because we want to be able to share in the smallest wins, the victories, the struggles, and be able to recognize and identify when things are going off track. Another journal is a anxiety journal. It's a separate journal in the way that I ask people to have the anxiety journal as a tracker to recognize when the anxiety arises. And remember, when I talk about common threads, by journaling and having an anxiety journal, you can see some of the patterns that are going on a regular basis sometimes. Another reason for the anxiety journal is to get to know the triggers. What is triggering us to start feeling anxious and sending us in that spiral of fear and not being able to focus or concentrate at times, or even be able to plan out and do activities because anxiety is holding us back. So again, very important pieces that we need to be able to see. And by writing it, it gets it out of your head and onto paper. And sometimes that's a real freeing and powerful piece in itself. So journaling can be very helpful as well. The other thing that I wanted to talk about is the I'm going to kind of jump around a bit, but I think when we talk about anxiety, people will say, I just don't feel like myself. And often I need clarity on that. We need to discuss that in a little bit more depth, because often I don't know the person. More times than not, I would not know the person before they came to me and reached out for support. So by finding out what they used to be like versus what they're like now is also a really helpful tool in being able to aim towards goals. We must have goals, short-term goals, long-term goals, intermediate goals, but we need something to work towards. And I tell people there's no such thing as failing. You may fail forward, but you're never failing. The only way we can fail is if we quit. And I really strongly encourage people to never quit, never give up on their goals and dreams. So let's talk a little bit about the anxiety in the different ways that it can show up. There's several different types of anxiety disorders, but the 5 main types is generalized anxiety, social anxiety, panic disorder, agoraphobia, and specific anxiety. A lot of people that I'm coaching, I find, have more than one type of anxiety. We call it comorbidity, where there's 2 happening simultaneously. And often one of those is generalized anxiety. Worried excessively about things when there really isn't at times things to worry about. One client in particular was really worried about her finances, but she came from a wealthy background. She had a wealthy lifestyle, and she had no, from the person on the outside looking in, would think there's no reason for her to worry, but that was a real concern for her. So we had to work through some strategies on being able to not perseverate on those types of themes on a regular daily basis. Another thing that people will do is they will spend ample time on searching on the different social media platforms to get reassurance one way or another about their anxiety. And this could take, when I say ample, it could take 6 hours a day, it could take 8 hours, it could take even longer. So think about the amount of time that someone spends worrying excessively about things that often don't even come to be. There's all those hours accumulated that they could be doing something far more valuable and far more productive and rewarding, instead of increasing their anxiety by searching and searching. So the impact goes farther than just the thoughts themselves. There's a lot of emotional, psychological, physical symptoms that will present when living with anxiety. And some of it can be visible to the rest of the world, and others are something that the person has to convey to us. So it's important when we're asking questions that we know what kind of questions to ask to bring that to the forefront and be able to talk about it and have a deeper conversation about the signs and symptoms. So that's a little bit about anxiety. I'd like to spend a few minutes reading a couple excerpts out of my journal to maybe help you be able to identify. I always say that my mess, when I was diagnosed with OCD and anxiety, I was 27 years old, and my mess became a message. And so some of the ways that I show that is being supportive and being able to share my story with others, so that they know that I was once where maybe they are now, and that there is hope for them. And that's my mission in life, is to go out and serve those that are living a life of quiet desperation as I once did. So I hope that I can shed some light on where I'm coming from through excerpts of my journal. And these are all my original journals that I did when I was first diagnosed in 1995. So today I started my program. I feel good about taking the time to do so. Finally, I have been experiencing generalized anxiety most of the day at work, avoiding all the different parts of work because I was worried about harming other people. I told myself to relax and that I wouldn't do anything to harm others, but the fear and the anxiety remained just the same. If people were able to know what my thoughts were right now, I would definitely end up going to jail. And just a side note, all of my anxiety and OCD, the end result of it in my mind meant that I was going to end up in jail. And jail was the scariest place for me to ever be. So a lot of my end results of the reasons I didn't want to do things is because I didn't want to take that risk of doing something bad and ending up in jail. So just so you know about that. And then I want to just continue on to say that since I was diagnosed, I have noticed myself deteriorating even more. I cannot be in large crowds or be alone without feeling anxiety and extreme anxiety. I find it more and more difficult to go even next door to the grocery store. Last attempt of going to the grocery store made me feel overwhelmed. There was only 5 people in the entire store. And going down the first aisle, there was 3, and the next aisle 2. I left. I did not go back to the grocery store again until my husband could accompany me. I walked around the town and I stared into the window of this one store that I had never been in. I wondered what it was like inside, and when the lights came on at night, I would peer in. I said to myself, that would be my favorite store. But because there is so much in there and I could possibly drop something or hurt someone with something, I would never be able to go in that store. I often stood outside and looked in at night, as I did tonight, making sure I don't stand too close to the window in case I smash it. At times, I'm so happy to look in that store, and other times I'm very sad anxious that I might break a window. And so I need to put all my safety nets in place so that I don't. So just a little background on when I started. I was so anxious that I was confined to my home. I was afraid to leave my apartment, just to go down a flight of stairs to check the mail, and to go down to the basement to do my laundry was just over the top anxiety. So when I journaled in the beginning, I set myself some short-term and long-term goals, as I discussed earlier. And excuse me, I will share a little bit of that with you. In my next insert of my journal, I state, I feel like my world is getting smaller and smaller every day. Even home isn't safe at times. And I long for peace of mind and freedom. My mind is always working and thinking of fearful thoughts. Some of my short and long-term goals I want to put down on paper here. So for some of you, you may be able to relate to these, and some of them you may not, but I want to share a few of them. There was quite a few of them, but I look back on that now today and I think, wow, those were actual goals. The things I do now, I take for granted at one time were goals for me to be able to accomplish. And maybe you can see yourself in some of these goals living with anxiety now, that it's something that you can't do right now, but I want you to have the faith and the belief that you will be able to accomplish all of your goals if you set your mind to it. So here are some of my short-term goals back when I started my program with anxiety and OCD. My short-term goal was to go to a grocery store, go to a bakery, go to a gas station, and go to play horseshoes. My long-term goals, now these at the time when I said long-term were far into the distance, like maybe a year, 2 years, 3 years from now. My long-term goals was to drive again. I stopped driving when all of this happened because my anxiety was so elevated that I couldn't imagine even driving. Drive with my husband, drive with others, and drive by myself. That was a big star, because if I could ever drive again, I was going to feel empowered and excited to be able to know I could drive again. My long-term goal was to go to garage sales. I used to love going to garage sales. Try clothes on in a store. Go into different restaurants and just overall be free from anxiety and OCD. So if we reflect on those as goals, when I think about it right now, I think having short and long-term goals are much different now in my life than they were back then. Some of the goals back then were just survival goals, just being able to survive and do the simplest things in life that we take for granted. So if you're listening and you don't live with anxiety, I want you to be mindful that there are people out there that what you may take for granted, that it looks way too huge for them to even start to consider challenging it. And I think another thing that I want to leave you with is, if you are living with anxiety, you have a few choices. You have the choice to do nothing. You have the choice to do something. And you also have the choice to make a big impact and difference in your life. But it's ultimately your choice when it comes down to it. I just hope that you can have the belief in yourself. And if you don't have the belief in yourself, borrow someone else's belief, even if it's just temporary, just to get you started. I hope this was helpful. This is our first session. If you have questions or you want to learn more about what we have available as resources and information and programming, feel free to come and visit our website. It's www.theocdcoach.com. I'll meet you there.